your station of choice, and certainly we are the best. We are at the second segment of the discourse on nationalism and you. We will be taking a look at the war against indiscipline 6 years after. And with me to take a look at this is Dr. Daniel Bwala.
It is my duty.
Dr. Daniel Bwala, Nationalism and You.
It is my duty and responsibility to build my nation.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
And if you're watching us out there, put your right hand on your chest and accept responsibility to build a Nigeria nation of our collective aspirations and goals. Yes, Dr. Bwala.
Thank you for having me.
We have an anti-corruption Caesar in President Muhammadu Buhari, and he itemized 3 areas of his tripod of engaging a nation building as a president: the security, economy, and the fight against corruption. This is 6 years. How have we fared?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, EFCC has been established before we came on board, and EFCC has had its own successes in the fight against corruption. But one problem we had in the administration before President Buhari took over was that there was a little bit of decline in the will to fight, graft. And I remember what became a common cliché was the famous quote by the then president, Goodluck Jonathan, when he said that stealing is not corruption. Because at the time, there were allegations that members of his cabinet and people in his government were involved in corrupt practices, and he wasn't doing anything about it. So he said he was working on fighting corruption, but that people should know it is institutionally based and that stealing is not corruption. And that became the climax of his administration. And people, based on that, lost confidence in the fight against corruption. And indeed, it was evident, because at some point, people were just doing what they wanted, But when President Buhari came on board, so knowing that there was already a decline, you remember $20 billion was alleged to have been misappropriated from NNPC. Then you had issues in aviation in different parts of the government, which evidently, at the end of the day, it showed, because when EFCC sprung into action during President Buhari, they started with the Dasuki Gate, and then it spiraled into various other investigations where there were confessions to the fact that monies were misappropriated at the time. And so this was the foundation upon which President Buhari, came and began his own government. One distinctive characteristics of the administration of President Buhari with respect to the fight against corruption, which even the fiercest critics will have to admit, is that President Buhari injected the will to do that. There are people who, till date, will also argue that there are corrupt people in this government and there are corrupt practices in this government. You can't rule that out. And I'm not about to come here and say nobody is corrupt or there can't be corruption. Corruption is endemic.
People say that the fight against corruption seems to be one-sided, and others says that when you move from the opposition party to the APC, that your sins are forgiven. Do you share this view?
Well, to me, it's a partial truth. Why did I say that? It's because if what they say is what it is as in the real sense of the word, you recall Joshua Dare and Joshua Dare, that's from Jos, and then Joe Linyame. They were all in APC when they were convicted. Ordinarily, if what people are saying is the case, that means when they join APC, their sins ought to have been forgiven. Maybe the prosecution ought to have called off the cases, but they were still convicted. And I know that in this same administration, you have seen former governors, former ministers, who till date They are being investigated. You recall property assets belonging to Rocha Sokorocha, who is a staunch member and stakeholder in APC. It's been investigated. I don't think that that narrative is correct. But then the other thing is that the fight against corruption, there would always be a set of people who will think that it is one-sided. The good thing about it all is that our administration is transitional. So you get the chance, if you fight on the left side, you get the chance when somebody comes from the right side to also fight, and then we have a balance. But the question is that, do you see half cup full or half cup empty? If it is one-sided, isn't it better, assuming without considering that that is true, isn't it better to have a one-sided fight than no fight at all? Because we know that somebody will come and then, but I don't even share the view, because I have just cited classical case of stakeholders in the party. I'm not talking about ordinary members of the party, people that have capacity to influence the progress of the party in their respective states. They have been convicted. Some have been investigated. Some currently are tried before the court of law.
Very well. Dr. Bwala, how would you quantify the success in form of itemization of what has been achieved thus far since Buhari came in? How would you quantify that?
So a graphic example is the 2018-2019 budgets were funded partly by the recovered monies from the anti-corruption fight. You recall that customs and immigration, the kind of revenue they generated, it never happened in the history of Nigeria. Nigerian Ports Authority, the kind of revenue. Another case of fighting against corruption. The MD of NPA was suspended. Isn't she a member of AP? She is. So the recovered loot since President Buhari came on board is evident and is out there in the public. And as, for example, the Abacha $300 million Abacha loot, which the government of Nigeria was able to recover, is what is being used to fund 3 major projects, one across the north, one across the west, one across the south. You know, so this is graphic example of the effect of the recovered loot. The budget I told you about it, so in infrastructure you find it. And some of the monies also that were recovered, remember there was a time where used in giving relief to states that, you know, we are financially bankrupt, as it were. And then you also have the revenue, what do you call it? There is, I don't know whether the right word to say is the Reserve Bank, but the recovered loots are there with the Central Bank of Nigeria. And these are evident of monies. Then you talk about non-monies, maybe assets like properties. We are News Organization of Nigeria, NOA, where NOA is at the moment. That building was recovered from late the former Chief of Defense Staff. There are so many other parastatals of government that are currently occupying a building that was recovered from corrupt public officials.
Taking this further, Nigerians are largely seeing this fight against corruption as Buhari thing.
What
is your take on this?
That is my concern, quite frankly. And as one who has been a very strong supporter of this administration and its drive against corruption, this statement that people are saying, I think has a very heavy evidence to support that. Because if you look at the government of President Buhari, because usually the government is that of APC. We have APC control states, but they are not in sync in terms of fighting corruption. You have to institutionalize transparency, then you are fighting corruption. You have to show probity and accountability, then you are fighting corruption. Are states doing that? And then if you come to the federal level, when President Obasanjo started this fight against corruption, that was when they introduced Servicom, where in agencies of government you have a right to be served right, and then there are contact numbers where you report any form of corrupt practices, people demanding money before they perform their official duty. You would have thought that at federal level we'll see the same. And then you would now say the fight against corruption is being institutionalized, in the same way corruption was institutionalized. But it seems it is only President Buhari doing the fight. And that's why sometimes I pity him. It's like a one man with the vision. And yet it is supposed to be the entirety of the members of APC carrying it on board. There are quite a number, one or two handfuls in the administration that are also supportive and are pushing the drive. But it is largely his vision. It has not been sold to others to pursue it. And you know, one thing about vision is like relay. You run, you give it to another person. He runs and gives it to the next person. By the time you run, you come and there's nobody to hand over. When you're going, you go with it. And this is an example of the problem that we might likely face, except, of course, if the person who succeeds him shares his vision, or somebody who succeeds him even comes up with a very deeper and bigger, vision in the area of fighting corruption. But I'm telling you that the way the international community rates this government with respect is because of the fight against corruption. You take that out, we're going back to the yesteryears, where there will not be confidence in the way we do our own things. Look at Nigerians abroad. For example, in the area of the fighting corruption that I say President Buhari is actively playing a role, we have had successes in terms of information and intelligence sharing. That was how the NFIU came on board, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. Then the confidence is developed. The rest of the world will share intelligence with Nigeria about corrupt practices across the globe. You see our bilateral relationship, this mutual legal assistance with Dubai. That is the next safe haven for the corrupt public officials and corrupt people in Nigeria, where they go to buy assets. We have now signed that mutual legal assistance. So it is easy to extradite a fugitive that run from Nigeria to the United Arab Emirates. It's also easy to recover proceeds of crime that are domiciled in their countries, whether in form of cash in the bank or assets that you can see. But again, the problem is, it seems to be largely a one-man vision. I know that the vice president shares the same vision, but when we talk about one-man vision, they are talking about the presidency. That's the president and the vice president who come under the same ticket. So when he's leaving, they are living together. So this is the question. And I think that the president needs to look into that.
At about, I don't know whether you noticed, it was widely reported at about 2016, the National Orientation Agency relaunched War Against Indiscipline. They actually christened it like that, War Against Indiscipline. And when we take a look at it, War Against Indiscipline that was done when President Muhammadu Buhari came in as a military head of state, permeated the society so much that in the house, when you are misbehaving, your son, your daughter will say, Dr. Bwala, why? There is war against indiscipline and the rest of it. You want to defecate on the street. Somebody will say, why? And you shrink and that kind of a thing. It permeated society. And it was structured along the line of taking turn, cue, environmental, and things of those nature. Why haven't we been able to transfer the war from being a Buhari thing into the society? Yet we have an organization as National Orientation Agency in place.
The problem we have with some of the agencies of government that manage media is that people will tell you that from 1999 till today, that this administration has the worst media management apparatus. That's why the progress of the president is not being seen by others. President Buhari has done more for the various parts of this country. I'll just cite an example to you. PDP had been in government, they've not done anything about the second Niger bridge. If you look at what is going on there, yet the people, the extraction, the people who live around there don't see President Buhari as anything good. Why? Because the managers of the president are not communicating. You see, people have to be communicated to and convinced. Now, coming back to this war against indiscipline, it was launched without works to back it up, to be honest. But I know for sure that there will be difficulty in implementation if you are looking at it comparatively, because at the time when the President Buhari, during the military era, the enforcement was by the military. There was no due process of law where if you fail to comply, we'll sue you. We go before the court, you put up your defense, I marshal my case, and then judgment is given, then appeal and all that, which naturally takes time. In the military junta, it is there and then. They will ask you to kneel down. They will ask you to do frog jump. They will whoop you. So that sort of brought fear, palpable fear in people. So some of the obedience and compliance at the time were not born out of their heart, but because there was going to be an instant repercussion. Now, if you are going to do this war against indiscipline under a democratic setting, I know it's going to be slowed, but it is still possible. But how to do it is you institutionalize it in all the agency of government. Take, for example, due process that was introduced by President Obasanjo is part of war against indiscipline. Means that you have to follow due process of law. In public procurement, there's not going to be somebody influencing you to get a job. There are procurement processes that you must comply. And in all aspects of government, this is how you move government administration to become transparent and not to give room for corrupt practices. So this agency, ever since agency or group, ever since it was established, I have not seen their engagement with department, ministries, and agencies of government. Because usually you come out with a well thought out vision of what you intend to do. And then there should be synergy between that agency, Ministry of Information, and the other agencies of government in terms of inculcating that into our way of life. So, for example, road safety. If road safety is properly briefed on this matter, the modalities, the vision, and everything, road safety now will bring that into their operations on the street. Then the police system too will be there. And then by the time the instruments of government are intact, then you bring public enlightenment, because then it falls on me and you. When we see it, we report. But when the people who are going to report to don't even know it, they are not even aware. How do I report? I remember during the PDP, when you go to the queue and you jump queue, at a point it became a common cliche then was, you did PDP on me. Mm-hmm. So anything, if you bypass the law, bypass due process, was called PDP thing. I'm afraid that by the time we leave here, let no thing be also Christian with APC. Because that is the only way you build nation. To be honest with you, the dilemma of every leader all over the world is in choosing the right people. A good leader with wrong people will leave a bad legacy. A bad leader with good people will leave a good legacy. All over the world we are seeing it. You will see a dictator in an administration, but he's smart enough to get people who know the job and who can do damage control for him. And his public image continues to go up. And you see somebody, a well-intentioned person. Like if you look at President Buhari, he's one of the few leaders, to be honest, that is well-intentioned. If, like from my party level at APC, anytime there seems to be something that looks like a crisis, and somebody is trying to tell you, I know president, I influence this thing, there's nothing like that. Whenever a matter comes to him, do you know what he will say? That it is a party affair. Don't rope me into it. I am in governance. There are leaders of the party. They should take decision. Very few leaders since 1999 have done that. Secondly, nobody comes to you and say, because I know President Buhari, I can bypass protocol, and then he will support. If that matter come, however close you are to him, the president will just abandon you. That kind of well-intention. Now, let me tell you his greatest problem. And it is with every leader who believes in others. Because true leadership is delegation, choosing the right people and giving them the freedom to operate. The only problem that I see my president has is what we call monitoring and evaluation, right? He trusts people easily. And when he gives you responsibility, he believes you should go to sleep because it is your duty to do it and you have all the powers to do it. Anytime you come, if it is power or resources, he will give you. Now, because the mechanism for monitoring and evaluation appears, it may be there, but appears not to be seen. When you have the wrong people in places, then that wrong action or wrong deed or wrongdoing becomes amplified and multiplied. And that is what we have, even with the war against indiscipline. If not because you mention it here, can I be very honest with you? I have never heard. To be honest with you. If not because you mention it right here on set, I have never heard that in this administration there is an agency created to push that. That's why I say the media management apparatus of the president is the lowest in terms of rating.
No, what they did was that the National Orientation Agency revoked the former war against indiscipline and the rest of it, and I said, can that work under civilian administration will it not take a form of persuasive institutionalizations, just like the way you have explained? But let's move away from there. Now,
but permit me to just chip in. It may not even have to be persuasive. It can be enforcement, but it should be done with due process. I'll give you an example. If I come to the Ministry of Government to ask for anything, and there is a due process I must follow, nobody needs to persuade me to do it. If I don't do it, I don't get it. If I am supposed to do an act, failure upon which I am supposed to be punished for it, nobody needs to persuade me to do it, because there are consequences. It is only when it relates to the general public. So first, you must do it in government apparatus. Government systems must imbibe that culture. Then you can then begin to orient the public on how that culture is to be obeyed. An average Nigerian, when he goes to the forest station, is cognizant of the fact that he should join queue. Before he jumps the queue, he looks around. And in fact, he tests what they call test the microphone. He tries to call one or two staff of the filling station and ask the question. Assuming the NNPC, you know, they have this, they are monitoring people that go around and then see if you are selling above, if you are selling below, you know. If those ones are in constant touch with filling station, especially with respect to punishment that can come on the filling station if there is a violation like that, the filling station will tell their own staff, who will tell the agents that loiter around. And then you begin to see compliance. The thing is, the government systems have not incorporate that or inculcate that into the culture of administration. So it is difficult for you to then go back to the masses and begin to demand compliance. There has to be compliance from the vision, from the government apparatus, and then you can then demand it from the masses.
Taking it further, Dr. Bwala, the necessity to meet needs is a natural phenomenon that can either lead to corruption or arrest corruption and things of that nature. What I mean by this is that, is the government doing enough to sublimely look deeply into those issues that can challenge individual to say we can stand to resist corruption? For example, a civil servant collecting 18,000 minimum wage or 30,000 minimum wage, living in a house of 300,000, 500,000 per annum, and things of that nature. Is there any
incentive
to ensure that such person is shielded away from corruption?
You see, this is a very vital question, but some people put this point as a defense for involving in corrupt practices, because you can then look at it comparatively. There are other families again who collect less than minimum wage, live in the suburb, have children about 4 or 5, yet they do not engage in corrupt practices, or opportunity has not come for them to be engaged in corrupt practices. So here is the point. The government is across 3 levels. You have federal, state, and the local government. If you work with federal government and then you follow the minimum wage standards, are you supposed to be in a house where you pay 500,000? Because there is this common cliche, coat your coat, no longer according to your size now, it's according to your clothes. Because your size might be big, your clothes is less. You have to quote according to it. So a civil servant who is transferred, say, from Maiduguri to Federal Secretariat here in Abuja doesn't have to live in Wuse or Garki, where he will be required to pay that much. He can live in Mararaba, where he pays 250. I'm just giving an example. Now, but the worst case scenario is that if he feels he cannot match that, there are 2 options available to him. 1, to resign and find other means of survival, or 2, to make the case. Now, inflation is one of our major bane. The dollar then was 150. The dollar now is almost 500. So prices of goods go up as inflation rises, and then your purchasing power reduces. Then you're confronted with the situation of having to compromise. If we take that as a defense, there is the armed robber will tell you why he is robbing. Is because the job is engaging or involving is not enough to take care of his family. The bandit will justify that, because in fact, when you arrest the bandit, this is what they say: we cannot eat, we cannot do that. There is no justification for crime. That's the point I'm saying. But you see, in a saner environment, what they do is that where our purchasing power is far below the prices of market in the goods, we have our respective association. You know, they have the workers' union. That is where the association take it up with government. Why are the doctors striking? Because what the government promised, they didn't abide by that. And they felt that if you compare what they earn with other African countries, that the African countries earn far more than them, and they are in a very worse condition. Imagine how we came into this pandemic. We were the doctors were like our gods. Imagine as soon as vaccine, medicine, therapeutics were discovered, the doctors are now considered like things in the toilet. So what I'm saying in essence is that the various associations, the labor unions, are the ones that take up this case against government. It does not give room for corruption. And then you can go on strike and say what the government is paying on is not commensurate. Then the government will be forced to think of alternative. So labor unions are the means by which workers air their grievances and enforce compliance from government, demand compliance from government. But how many people are in government cycle? That's the question. We have a population of barely 150 million or more. The workforce of Nigeria, is it up to 3 million? So you have 90-something% of the people who do not work with government and are confronted with the realities of life. What should be their excuse if those who are opportune to be with government? Somebody has graduated with degree. He has his master's. And he went for master's while awaiting to get a job. Has finished his master's, now even works as a gate man. Yet, he does not see any reason why he should engage or involve in corrupt practices. Then a civil servant who is opportune to get a job with government, where you have house allowance, everything allowance, and you sit in a well-conditioned environment. You have job security in case you retire. All of these things are there in your favor, not in the favor of 97% of the populace. And every day they work against corruption. And then use that as a ground to be engaged in corrupt practices. That is not an excuse. Then look at the administration. This is where transparency plays. It is rather the way administration is structured in government that creates room for corrupt practices. If I go to government offices, your approval is made for your payment for the services you rendered as a legal practitioner. And then a department is saying that the money can't be released until you give them money. I'll never give you them shishi. I will insist, but when I have my money, at any time you are in need, anybody can knock at anybody's door and ask for help. But we should never encourage corrupt practices.
Whichever way we look at it, many Nigerians are complaining that there is so much insensitivity in the government, particularly among our elected representatives,
Correct.
taking into considerations their take-home package compared to ordinary civil service workers and even lecturers at the university, particularly the political offices holders. How do we relate this with our fight against corruption?
I agree with them very well. Because, take for example, the governor is the chief executive officer of the state. He has a salary measured by the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation, and Fiscal Commission. But that is not what he lives by. There are other allowances. And then you have what you call security vote, which cannot be accounted for, cannot be investigated, so to speak. And that is where the massive corruption is perpetuated. Then you have governors encouraging insecurity so they can have ground to put money into what they call security vote. Do you get? And they perpetuate corrupt practices. We're talking of governor. That same governor now, there is a legislation, constitutional amendment that says House of Assembly and the judiciary are now independent and the money from the federal allocation should go to them directly. The governor is fighting that. Why is he fighting? If not corrupt practices, the money is not his own. You bring it down to councillor. You bring it down to chairman. What they earn, and then you bring it down to lawmakers. What they earn is far, far more than what the general public make. But you see, until recently, all the allegations against the National Assembly have always kicked against the National Assembly. They collect bogus things and things. Until recently, I realized what has been projected as the accusation against them is not the real sense. Rather, it is when they preside over committees, committee on this committee. So that's where they get some of these favors and benefit. But in terms of what they are entitled to, it is still regulated by Revenue Mobilization and Allocation and Fiscal Commission, which can be accessed by everybody. It's consolidated. So once you are able to determine salaries based on consolidation, without going to ask somebody, show me your salary, you already know what he earns.
What will be your advice what will be your advice towards ensuring that the society take over this fight against corruption rather than the presidency or Buhari thing?
Well, the institution of EFCC, they are doing their best. I remember when Ibrahim Magu was in charge, we advised and he embarked on this project where he says the nation should take the ownership of the fight. So they engage them through public enlightenment and the rest, that it is your fight, it is your future and all that. Bawa has come on board and Bawa is also trying. In fact, last 2 weeks, I paid a courtesy visit to him. We sat down. A few times we've had the conversation. I was highly impressed. He was looking at EFCC away from a bullish organization to institutional-based, anti-corruption fight. Looking at the root causes, I was so impressed. He wants to model it after FBI and NCA. Where, for example, I can't go to EFCC and say, because I don't like you, I will influence them to attack you. Or I will just write any bogus petition and then they begin to act. They investigate that. Do you know that they created an app where, for example, you don't have to go far. If you suspect that I'm a corrupt public official and you suspect places where I have houses and assets, all you do is you go and snap it, upload it on the app, and they have it. And they treat that confidentiality, so nobody knows who reported. They investigate those individuals. This is one of the biggest achievements to the fight against corruption.
Thank you very much. It has been wonderful talking with you. And we hope that you will make yourself available to us, because this type of a topic, you can hardly finish it up, and the rest of it, there is so much to ask about it.
Right.
But because of our time, we are rounding up here.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Dr. Daniel Bwala on how to own the fight against corruption and the successes so far. We are still here on This Morning on ITV, your station of choice. And I want you to keep a date with us at the next level of nationalism and you, coming next week, Thursday. But don't change the channel, for many things are still coming your way. I remain your host, Ebenezer Oyetaki.